of the density. It's a little bit fast. So I don't know for you, but for me it's too complicated to understand anything when I see this type of movie. You have, well, it's complicated. But it also shows you that we have obviously flow of electrons, but they are not the electrons that are flowing like this. You see that depending on the underlying chemical structure, you have a structure in all those flows. So we started at least to see how we could simplify the picture. And one thing to do is to look at the charges on the fragments. So this is what we did. So let's look on this example where the collision is perpendicular to the base, and you have the charge on the different fragments. So green, the charge on the base, in red on the sugar, in orange on the phosphate, and in blue, the total charge of the solvation layer. So you see that many things are taking place. So let's look step by step, and let's focus on this one. First, we have something at the beginning, big variations of the charges. What's taking place? So this is 3, so almost the peak here, or the bottom here. It is at the moment really of the collision, when the projectile is hitting the molecule. And just here, the projectile is just already a few angstrom away. So you see that the charge on the base is going down, so it means that electrons are more present on the base. The charge on the solvation layer is increased a lot, so the solvation layer is losing electrons, and also a little bit of sugar. So how we interpret this, it is through what we have called an ebb and flow mechanism, which is the following. Here we have a +2 charge, which is approaching. It's an helium alpha particle. And of course, the electrons of the molecule, they are attracted by this plus charge, which is approaching. And so the electrons from the sugar and from the solvation layer, globally they go towards the base, and this is why you have this decay of the charge. And of course, conversely, the charge on the water is going up because they lose electrons. And immediately after, so a few tens of attoseconds after the collision, the electrons that were accumulated on the base, they flow back on the water shell and on the sugar. So you see that just after the collision it goes back. And also you have emission of electrons, because you see that the charge on the base is going up, it's not going back to 0 anymore, which means that we have emission of electrons. Another thing that we can see is that the electrons that are emitted, they are now localized on the solvation layer, because the solvation layer now has a negative charge. So this is a little bit what is expected. We unite the base, the electrons are expelled, and around is the solvation layer. But we see that it has escaped. What we see also is that after a few, so this is a ionization mechanism, but we see also that after a few femtoseconds, we see the charge on the base going down, the charge on the sugar going up. So it means that there is a charge transfer still at fixed nuclear position between the base and the sugar. And this is seen, you see in all cases. And finally, we don't see any charge transfer from the phosphate to the uracil base, which was the question we had originally. Could we have a charge transfer from the phosphate, to the base? It's not the case. You see that the orange line are always almost constant throughout the process. So apparently this type of mechanism cannot account for the absence of oxidized uracil in the experiment. So we did also experiment with low energy electrons that we treated as classical particle. I go very fast, but basically we find the same type of mechanism with this ebb and flow mechanism at the beginning. So polarization, strong polarization of the density, and then emission of the electron. It's reversed because now we have a -1 charge which is approaching. But basically, well, we can go into detail if you want, but we see similar things. And especially no charge transfer again from phosphate to the base. We also did something that was a little bit different. We thought, okay, let's try, instead of doing the ionization itself with the collision, we could select a given molecular orbital from the ground state density, remove an electron by hand, and see how it evolves. So this is what we did. We selected various MOs from the system, localized here on the uracil, here on the sugar, and we remove the electrons. So at the beginning we have here a charge of almost 1 on the uracil. But again, we see roughly similar things, so that delocalization between the sugar and the base, but no ionization of the phosphate. So we looked for another mechanism, maybe a Marcus-like theory mechanism, so which is a more common mechanism in chemistry to account for electron transfer. Well, Marcus theory won the Nobel Prize for that in the 90s, for developing with other people the framework to do that. And so we have various ingredients in Marcus theory, and so what we want to do is understand this mechanism. So we have a -2 charge on the phosphate at the beginning, and 1 electron will go to this base, this sugar nucleobase, because we know that now with the real-time simulation that the whole would be delocalized between the two. So in Marcus theory, we usually define 2 what we call diabatic states that correspond to the initial state, so the electron on the phosphate, and the final state where we have moved 1 electron. So you see that now the charges are different. So this is the first ingredient. And so what we find usually if you Google Marcus theory, you will find these 2 parabolas that are really famous, that describe, I will come back on this, but describe basically the energy of the system in the 2 electronic states, so either in the initial electronic state or in the final electronic state. And in the Marcus theory framework, we define at least two important quantities. One is the free energy of the reaction, delta A, which is the difference between the bottom of the 2 potential wells, and another quantity which is called the reorganization energy, which is here, which is basically associated to the energy that you have to, or the work you have to bring to the system to deform it from the equilibrium structure corresponding to the initial state to the equilibrium structure corresponding to the final state. So this is really sketchy. I will come back on this later, but of course, because we have different charge distribution, the energy of the different, the geometry, equilibrium geometry will be different. But there is one thing that we shouldn't neglect at all, and this is the heart of Marcus theory, is the effect of the solvent. The solvent, if you change the charge distribution in the UPS molecule, they will readapt completely, well, a lot. This is an example of a BOMD simulation, which computer is slow. I don't know if you see well, but this is, at the beginning we are at the beginning in this state, and then I just removed an electron, and you see, if you look at the water, the big water here, which are the closest one, you will see that they really rearrange to the new charge distribution. So to get a complete picture, we really need to take into account all the conformation of the water molecule and of the molecule between and after the transfer. So this is done through a statistical thermodynamic theory that was especially developed by Harry Warshel, who really made a connection between the phenomenological Marcus theory picture and the microscopic point of view. So, and I would really recommend you to look at the papers from Warshel. Especially these ones, they are really crystal clear. It's a really beautiful work. I go fast on this because we could in fact spend quite a lot of time to really explain everything, but basically you can really evaluate this type of, the rate from this type of equations, where the J the G are the free energies of the for the 2 electronic states, initial or final. So that's the framework. So we can do with Demon, we have the tools to really describe with computer simulation an electron transfer reaction in the framework of the Marcus theorem. So this is done with the constrained DFT methodology that you have now implemented. I think will soon be in the distributed version. What we did basically, so to build this Marcus theory parabolas, we have 4 steps. So the first one in our case, we do a BOLD simulation on the initial state, so before radiolysis. And so we equilibrate our system. We had, in our case, 45 picoseconds of MD simulation. And we take some points, or let's say here. So we take the position and velocities of the nuclei. We remove 1 electron to simulate the radiolysis process. And we do 2 Born-Oppenheimer's MD simulation with constrained DFT to impose either this charge repartition or this charge repartition, which are the 2 Marcus theory states that are of interest for us. And we run 5 picosecond simulation. 5 picosecond simulation because we know in the experiment that is the first time they have 5 picoseconds. So that's the only sampling we do. But we take, in our case, we took 11 starting points from the initial trajectory to sample the initial conditions. And finally, we reprocess all the simulations to get the energies, the vertical energy gap, so the energy of the 2 diabatic states along each trajectory, and what is called the electronic coupling, so the quantum mechanical coupling between the 2 diabatic states. So once we have this, it takes time to do that, but once we have this, we have quite interesting results. So I will show you not all the results. The diagram is for the first set of curves. And so we effectively find our 2 parabolas. And this is for the parabola for the first set. And these are all the repetitions that we did from different initial conditions. So what we see are various things. So first, if we look at the delta A, which is the free energy of the reaction, we always have negative values. So it means that effectively the process is thermodynamically favorable. So to have the transfer from the phosphate to the base. So we have some scattering or standard deviation, but it's always negative. What we can also evaluate the lambda is the reorganization energy here, that is given here. So these are quite high reorganization energy. On this table, we have other results, but these values are missing induction in the polarizable force field, and it is known that the reorganization here are overestimated by almost 30%. So on this table, I have another corrected lambda that I decreased, which are more reliable. We have also polarizable QMMM simulations that are inconsistent with that, but I don't give them. But I mean, to compute a rate, we should take more this corrected lambdas. So we compute the rate with the Marcus theory expression. So now that we have the reaction energy, activation energy, that free energy that we can compute from the driving force and from the lambda. And we need also the quantum mechanical coupling here that we can compute with constrained DFT. This is the last column here. And what we see here, don't take these values for completely exact. We have uncertainties, but at least we are in the range of the picosecond time scale. So it's going into the good direction. Eventually, effectively, we could have a sub-picosecond electron transfer from the phosphate to the uracil base. So this is in fact how we accounted for the experimental results, that they don't have this, they don't observe this hole on the uracil after the radiolysis. So we are now also working to see this type of mechanism is also at play in real DNA, not just in one base, but in DNA. And this is really important to understand how then we could have chemical damage from in DNA. ¿Cuánto tiempo tengo? 5 minutos? Ok, gracias. Lo voy rápido. Entonces, well, finally, in the last part, I will describe you some simulations purely theoretical in this case, of radiolysis of DNA. So we wanted to understand with this real-time TD-DFT calculation what are really taking place when we irradiate DNA, and we wanted to focus on the effect of the environment of the base that we collide. And so we considered this guanine that we started to add with some environments, the sugar, a Watson-Crick base, some microsolvation, and finally a really big double-strand DNA. And for each of these simulations, we decided to collide the guanine in the same conditions and to see what was the differences between the different cases, to see if the environment was changing something. So we did various simulations. I will essentially show you simulations with that are hitting in the center. What we found, this is here the energy which is deposited in the system as a function of the projectile kinetic energy. And you see, so you have the blue curve, which is in fact corresponding to this big system, which is a little bit, which is clearly different. But otherwise, all the curves are quite similar. So the blue curve is different because in fact the system in fact has also water molecules. So when we irradiate guanine here, we also irradiate a water molecule. And here, this is the profile of the energy deposited as time. We have the first peak that corresponds to deposition of energy in the base, and then the second peak is deposition of energy in the solvation water molecule. So, to really be fair, we should compare only the very first part that corresponds to the guanine. And so what we found is that basically the energy which is deposited it's really a local property. Almost doesn't almost, but it's not completely clear to be honest, but doesn't seem to depend on the presence of the environment. It's really a local property, the density on the guanine itself. But I will go fast and instead show you this showcase simulation for us, which is the irradiation of this big DNA double strand. So we wanted to see what was the difference of irradiating the DNA with different irradiation conditions, either alpha particles that have +2 charge, protons +1 charge, or carbon ions +6 charge. Why carbon ions? It's not just like this, it's because it is one of the kind of projectile radiation particles that are now really sought in various countries to be used in radiation therapy, in Japan especially, because they are expected really to lead to localized energy deposition on the cells. So we did QMMM simulations. This is only the QM region, but it's still quite a big system. And so the projectile is going through the double helix, hitting these various molecules that you have in color. So 2 water, 1 base, 2 base, 3 base, 4 base, and finally a 7th water molecule. And here you see effectively that the density profile of the ground state along the dynamics, and these peaks corresponds to the densities of each of the frameworks. And at the bottom you have the energy profile, the profile of energy deposited along the dynamics. And so you see that you have hopes, 7 hopes that correspond to each of the collision along the projectile trajectory. So you see that when you have +2 charge, you have more energy deposited than when you have protons, because you have a +2 charge which is reacting more with the electrons. Again, if you look at the energy which is deposited, it is absolutely huge, hundreds of eV. And if you consider even now carbon ions, we have thousands of eV, more than 1,000 of eV. So this is really, really important. To see a little bit what is taking place at the level of the density, this is again a deformation density in the dynamics. So the projectile is coming here. So in yellow, in orange, it's where the electrons are depleted, so less electron than in the ground state. And in blue, the accumulation. So you see that it starts to, in fact, perturb molecules that are not heated by the projectile. And you see that all the way, the density is strongly perturbed by the projectile. You see a lot of activity, essentially localized on the DNA base. this is for helium. And if you look closely, you will see that the size of these big bubbles, they will tend now to decrease a little bit than when it was at the beginning. And another thing which is important is to see that it's not really diffuse. So to analyze this, we look at the charges, the holes formed on each of the molecules. So it starts to be interesting because we can compare now the different radiation conditions. And I will just say one example of result, especially if you look at the ionization with carbon ions, you see that the probability of single or even double ionization are significant. And this is important because doubly ionized molecules, they will probably explode in a few picoseconds after the ionization. I will skip this, but we can draw a lot, or I'll skip, but still recall that we find again this type of head flow mechanism that we described for the UPS. We saw that the holes that are formed on the fragments, they stay on the fragments on the femtosecond scale. And something that was quite important for us was to understand where the electrons are going, because they are thought to be promoters of DNA damages. And we found that the electrons, they go on the other base, they go on the sugar, and they go also partially on the watershed. So that's as far as I know, the first simulations, first principle simulations, where we effectively start to get insights on the localization of these secondary electrons when we irradiate DNA. So I will conclude with some perspective and, well, first some conclusions, so I will not come back on this, but I hope I showed you the type of studies we can do. So we have now applications of these tools to various systems, various biological molecules with our experimental collaborators. We also have now starting to have more studies to validate the real-time TDDFT simulation versus experiment using attosecond experiments. On the perspective, there are really a lot of things to do at the computational level, the methodological developments. I think we have at least 10 years of developments. So any collaborator or people who want to contribute, you are all welcome. We need to describe better the secondary electrons, these unbound electrons. We don't really know how to do that for the moment. I started to talk about polarization of the density when we have the collision and flow of electrons between the different fragments. And of course, after this week, we heard about conceptual DFT and some of the tools of conceptual DFT. In fact, I have been thinking about that for a couple of months now, and I wonder how these tools that are based on the stationary density, how we can adapt. Can we do something to go to the time-dependent domain? And I think it could be very useful to interpret the simulation. Well, things on the level of the functionals, how many things I see, and also the computational efficiency. For me, the objective would be to have a look at Andreas, 20,000 atoms, because the system we irradiate are nanometer scale, and they have to be treated quantumly, because it's, so let's be optimistic. So two announcements. We should have a PhD position open this spring in the group to work in the context of radiation damage in the context of nuclear energy, to understand the radiolysis of effluent due to ionizing radiation. So if you are interested, you can contact me. And more generally, we are looking for very good young people with one postdoc already, if they wish to apply for CNRS position in France in a project that on these topics that we could help them to develop. So if you have a good candidate in the sonar, in the radar, we would be happy. And so we'll finish, in fact, by thanking the people, especially Xiaoqing, Angela, Aurelio, and Karim, who did, in fact, most of the work that I showed you. And without them, I think we wouldn't have done much things. So really, really thank you to them, collaborators from France and Italy also. Also the people from the Limon Touquet community, so very nice people smiling people, as you can see. So there are many others. And some advertisements. So what I showed today, if you are interested to do this type of simulation, there is no problem for us to share the code. They are not all of them in the distributed version, but no problem to get the developer version. And well, you heard about that, but Daemon is really a very efficient code for doing DFT calculations. In our case, I was more focusing on QMML application, and you can do very many different things, various force fields. We have now tutorials that we soon put on the web. So to learn also by yourself to run QMML simulation with Daemon 2K. And you can do so Born-Oppenheimer MD, Ehrenfest MD, Electron Dynamics. You have interface to Plumb, so it means that you can do metadynamics path integral with Daemon, QMMM level. And also constraint DFT if you want to simulate this type of electron transfer in the Marcus theory framework. So all of this is available in Daemon, so make a try if you are interested. And I will stop and thank you for your kind attention.
Pasamos a la sección de preguntas.
Very nice, Aurelien.
Thanks.
I've seen it several times and I always enjoy it very much. I have several questions related actually to your perspective. And the first one is, well, you show a plot where you mentioned that the cross sections that you obtain are in good agreement with the experiment. But my concern is related to the fact that this is the question. You are considering the nuclei as point particles. Mm-hmm. Is that consideration appropriate for collisions of this kind of the projectiles that you are using at the energies that you are using? That's my first question. The second is related, I'm going from bottom up. No, in the perspective. The second is related, obviously, with first with the memory effects. How good or how bad do you think is the adiabatic consideration in the time-dependent DFT? Is that, I mean, these processes are really fast, so in this sense, I could say that the adiabatic ansatz is not that bad, but I would like to know your opinion of why do you think that memory effects could be important? That's the other one. And of course, related to the functionals. You never mentioned which functional you use, but you put two slides, well, several slides. One you use PVE, and in other you use half and half. Fortunately, you never use with relief. But my question is, just thinking about, I mean, the stuff that we are doing, I guess for this kind of calculations, to have a faster way to evaluate the Cherenkov correlation is always good. So in one of your slides, you wrote that having exact exchange is important for electron coupling. So I would like to know why is that so, and if you think that effect can be really described with the GGA, like the GGAs that we are developing that include the long-range correlation. And the last one is on the top, my last question. My last question is, well, certainly there are several works done with conceptual DFT on the time domain. That's work that has been done, started to be done several decades ago by Ghosh in India. But I think now that we have also extended this to the temperature domain, I think it could be very interesting to go back to this work and to see, because new descriptors have been developed on the context of temperature dependent. Okay. So that could be very interesting to see if we can apply those descriptors to your process. Very nice, I really enjoyed it.
So, well, I will not take them in order, but so for the ionization itself. So we tried also NCAP. and we tried NCAP, CAP-PDE also. So for the unionization itself, so we didn't see any influence of the functional, and for me it's not surprising because it is essentially Coulomb driven. So that's a good point. And with respect to the adiabatic approximation, I think I agree with you, it is so fast, so it's okay. Where I start to be concerned is on what is happening after that. I mean, the few femtoseconds where we start to have to describe this charge migration process in the system. So we have, I would say, the problem of self-interaction. I mean, we are creating holes and electrons. I would be tempted to say that the self-interaction problem at some point becomes a problem, and we don't have to quantify it at all. And for the adiabatic approximation, well, what I read from NIPA-META, for example, it seems that in some cases, effectively, it can lead to the wrong answer. So on very toy model or very well-controlled models, they could show that you have some charge dynamics that are not correctly described by real-time DFT. Usually it's not in the case of collision as we do, it's more in the case of photo excitation or photo electron emission, but still. But we haven't really worked on that for the moment. You had a question about the half and half leap for the constrained DFT. In fact, I remember when we started to work on that with Dennis, when I was a postdoc, we found in the literature some claims, the promoters of constrained DFT at that time, that constrained DFT was precisely solving the problem of the self-interaction for electron transfer reaction, because now we impose the electron to be on the donor or the acceptor. This is true, but what we found, we did extensive work with Jochen Blumberger and Markus Elsner, that still, if you look at the electronic couplings, they are basically related to the overlap of the wave of the quantum orbitals between the initial state and final state. And even if you have constrained DFT, the delocalization of these MOs, they are really dependent on the percentage of the fork exchange you have in the functional. And what we did was to play the game of benchmarking the functional. For the electronic couplings, they were the only criteria that was really impacting was the percentage of fork exchange. But then comparing MO6 to MO6 to X or BH half and half leap or PD0 with 50% exchange gave the same results. So we interpreted it essentially as an overlap that we had between the donor and the acceptor. Let me remember all the